My daughter-in-law tried to replace me, but my son realized love can't be replaced. You know, there are some pains in life that don't announce themselves with thunder and lightning. They come quietly, like frost creeping across a window pane. So slow, so subtle, you don't notice until one morning you wake up and everything you once saw clearly has turned cold and blurred. That's how it happened with her. My daughter-in-law didn't storm into my life trying to replace me. No, child. She tiptoed in with smiles and sweetness, and by the time I realized what was happening, she'd already redecorated my son's heart, and I wasn't part of the new design. Welcome, my dear. This is Grandma Alice Stories, where every tale carries a lesson and every wound carries wisdom. Sit close, pour yourself some tea-hot beverage, and listen carefully because this story isn't just about me. It's about every mother who's ever loved too deeply, trusted too freely, and learned the hard way that some people see love as a battlefield, not a blessing. I raised my son, Daniel, with these two hands. His father passed when Danny was only 8 years old. A heart attack that took him right there in our kitchen on a Sunday morning. One moment he was laughing at something Danny said. The next he was gone. Just like that. So it became just the two of us. Me and my boy against the world. I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. Mornings at the diner, evenings cleaning offices downtown. My back ached, my feet swelled, but I never let Danny see me cry. I wanted him to grow up knowing that love doesn't quit when life gets hard. I taught him to be kind, to be respectful, to honor the people who sacrifice for him. And he was such a good boy, my Danny. Smart as a whip, gentle as summer rain. When he graduated college, the first in our family, mind you, I sat in that auditorium with tears streaming down my face. I'd done it. We'd done it. All those double shifts, all those nights I went to bed hungry so he could have a decent meal, all those times I patched his jeans instead of buying new ones. It had all been worth it. Then he met her, Rebecca. Now, I want to be fair here. When Danny first brought her home, I truly wanted to love her. I opened my arms wide, opened my heart even wider. She was beautiful, I'll give her that, the kind of polished beauty that comes from good breeding and better bank accounts. Her family had money, the kind that's been around for generations. They lived in one of those neighborhoods where even the mailboxes look expensive. But I didn't care about any of that. I just wanted my son to be happy. Mom, Danny said that first evening, his eyes shining like they hadn't since he was a child on Christmas morning. Isn't she amazing? And I smiled, squeezed his hand, and said, if she makes you happy, baby, then she's perfect. I meant it too. Back then, I truly meant it. The wedding was beautiful, held at her parents' country club, with more flowers than I'd seen in my entire life. I wore the best dress I owned, a simple navy blue number I'd bought on sale 3 years prior. When I saw the other guests in their designer gowns and tailored suits, I felt small. But I held my head high because I wasn't there for them. I was there for my son. Rebecca's mother, Patricia, looked at me exactly once during the reception. Her eyes swept over my dress, my sensible shoes, my simple jewelry, and I saw it, that flicker of disdain, like I was a smudge on her perfect day. But I smiled anyway because that's what you do. You take the high road even when people try to push you into the ditch. The first year of their marriage, everything seemed fine. Danny would call me every Sunday, just like always. He and Rebecca would come over for dinner once a month. She was polite, if a bit distant. She'd smile at my stories but never really laugh. She'd compliment my cooking but never ask for the recipes. Little things you understand. Nothing you could point to and say, there, that's disrespect. But I felt it, the way you feel a storm coming even when the sky is still blue. Then they had the baby. Oh, my grandson. My beautiful, perfect little Thomas. When Danny called to tell me Rebecca was in labor, I drove to that hospital so fast I'm surprised I didn't get pulled over. I paced that waiting room for 6 hours, praying, hoping, remembering the day I'd given birth to Danny, and wishing his father could be there to see this moment. When they finally let me in to see the baby, My heart just about burst. He had Danny's nose, his delicate little fingers, that same tiny dimple in his left cheek. I held him so carefully, like he was made of moonlight and wishes. "Hello, sweet boy," I whispered. "I'm your grandma, and I promise you, I'm going to love you with everything I have." Rebecca was watching me from the hospital bed. I glanced up and smiled at her, expecting to share this moment of joy, but her expression was strange, tight, like she was calculating something behind those tired eyes. That's when things started to change. At first, it was subtle. They'd invite me over, but Rebecca would hover whenever I held Thomas, offering unsolicited advice on how to support his head, as if I hadn't raised a child myself, or suggesting I wash my hands again even though I'd just washed them. When I'd sing him the old lullabies I'd sung to Danny, she'd interrupt with some modern parenting podcast nonsense about overstimulation. Then came the holidays. Thanksgiving had always been at my house. It was tradition. My small dining room packed with love and laughter. My famous cornbread stuffing that Danny had loved since he was 5 years old. But that year, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Danny called. "Mom, Rebecca's parents want to host this year. At their place. They have more room, and with the baby." His voice trailed off. I could hear the apology in it, the guilt. "Of course, baby," I said, keeping my voice steady even though something inside me cracked. "That sounds lovely. You're invited, obviously. Dinner's at 3. I went. I brought my stuffing in a humble casserole dish that looked pitiful next to their crystal serving bowls and silver platters. Patricia barely acknowledged it. Rebecca thanked me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And when we sat down to eat, my dish was placed at the far end of the table, like an afterthought. Danny didn't even notice. That's what hurt most. Not Rebecca's coldness or Patricia's condescension, but the fact that my son, my beautiful, kind son, was starting to see the world through their eyes. And in their world, I was becoming smaller and smaller. Christmas came and went at their house. My birthday passed with a phone call instead of a visit. And when I suggested keeping Thomas for an afternoon so they could have a date night, Rebecca hesitated so long you'd think I'd offered to take him skydiving. "Maybe when he's older," she finally said. "I'm just more comfortable with my mother watching him for now. She has more experience with his routine." Experience. As if love could be measured in routines and schedules. But I smiled. I nodded. I swallowed every hurt like bitter medicine because I didn't want to be the difficult mother-in-law, the overbearing grandmother. I'd heard those stories. I refused to be that woman. So I stepped back. I gave them space. I waited for them to reach out first. And the calls became less frequent. The visits became rare. My grandson was growing up in photographs sent via text message instead of memories made in my arms. One evening, about 6 months after Thomas's first birthday, I was sitting in my living room. The same living room where I'd raised Danny, where we'd built pillow forts and read bedtime stories and laughed until our bellies hurt. The house felt so quiet now. So empty. My phone rang. It was Danny. "Hey, Mom. Listen, Thomas's second birthday is coming up. Rebecca's planning a big party at her parents' place. Sunday at 2. You'll come, right?" "Of course, baby. I wouldn't miss it." "Great. Oh, and Mom?" Rebecca asked if you could maybe, I don't know, just, her family is kind of formal, so maybe dress up a bit? Nothing major. Just, you know? The silence that followed was louder than any words. "Sure, Danny," I whispered. "I'll dress up nice." After we hung up, I sat in that quiet house and finally let myself cry. Not because of the clothes comment, though that stung, but because I realized what was happening. Rebecca wasn't just creating distance. She was rewriting our family story, and in her version, there wasn't enough room for both of us to be important. She was trying to replace me, and the worst part? My son didn't even see it happening. That Sunday, as I stood in my closet looking for something formal enough for my own grandson's birthday party, something shifted inside me. I'd spent months bending, accommodating, disappearing. But a mother's love isn't something you can just erase because it's inconvenient. I didn't know it then, but that birthday party was going to change everything. Because sometimes, when you push someone into the shadows long enough, they finally step into the light, and everyone sees what was there all along. I arrived at that party wearing my dignity like armor, but I had no idea what I was about to walk into, or how deep her plan to erase me had already gone. The address Rebecca's mother had given me led to a sprawling estate I'd never seen before. Not their usual country club, but some rented venue with manicured gardens and a white tent that looked like it belonged at a royal wedding, not a 2-year-old's birthday party. I sat in my car for a moment, staring at the valets in crisp uniforms directing guests where to park. Valets. For a toddler's birthday. I'd wrapped Thomas's gift myself. A handmade quilt I'd been working on for 3 months. Every stitch sewn with love. Every square containing a piece of fabric from significant moments. Danny's baby blanket, his first baseball uniform, even a scrap from my wedding dress. It was a legacy quilt, the kind meant to be treasured for generations. I tucked it in a simple gift bag because I couldn't afford the fancy wrapping paper everyone else seemed to favor. Walking toward that tent, I heard the laughter and music, saw the designer strollers and pearl necklaces, and felt that familiar smallness creeping back in. But then I thought of Thomas, my grandson, my blood, and I straightened my spine. I had every right to be here. Grandma Alice, a coordinator with a clipboard, smiled professionally. You can leave the gift at the table by the entrance. We're doing presents later. I placed my humble bag among the mountain of elaborate boxes wrapped in gold foil and silk ribbons. Mine looked like a sparrow among peacocks. Inside the tent, everything was perfect. Too perfect. There were balloon arches in shades of blue and gold, a dessert table that could feed a small village, a professional photographer capturing every moment, and at least 60 guests milling about in clothes that cost more than my monthly rent. I spotted Danny across the room, holding Thomas, who was dressed in a tiny suit that made my heart ache with how grown-up he looked. My son's face lit up when he saw me. Mom, you made it! He came over, and I finally got to hold my grandson for the first time in what felt like forever. Happy birthday, sweet boy, I whispered, kissing his forehead. He smelled like baby shampoo and something expensive I didn't recognize. He looked at me with curiosity, like he was trying to remember who I was. That hurt more than I expected. Alice. Rebecca appeared at Danny's elbow, stunning in a designer dress, her smile painted on perfectly. So glad you could make it. Doesn't everything look beautiful? My mother hired the same planner who did the governor's daughter's wedding. It's lovely, I said, because it was true. It was also excessive, ostentatious, and completely inappropriate for a child who wouldn't remember any of it. But I kept those thoughts to myself. Here, I'll take Thomas, Rebecca said, reaching for him even though he was perfectly content in my arms. He needs to greet the other guests. Patricia's friends from the garden club specifically came to see him. And just like that, my moment was over. I spent the next hour floating around the edges of conversations where I didn't belong. Patricia's friends discussed vacation homes in the Hamptons and charity galas. Rebecca's college friends compared notes on private preschools and nanny services. Danny was pulled in multiple directions, playing the proud father, barely noticing that I stood alone by the gift table, smiling politely at strangers who looked through me like I was part of the decoration. Then came the moment that broke something inside me. They'd set up a slideshow, photographs of Thomas's first 2 years projected on a large screen. The coordinator announced it with great fanfare, and everyone gathered to watch. I expected to see the photos I'd sent, the moments from our visits, the pictures Danny had promised to include. But as image after image flashed across that screen, I realized something terrible. I wasn't in any of them. Not one single photograph. There was Rebecca's mother holding Thomas at the hospital. Rebecca's sister at his first Christmas. Rebecca's father at his first birthday. Aunts, uncles, cousins I'd never met. All beaming at the camera with my grandson. But the woman who'd raised his father, the grandmother who'd loved him from his first breath, had been erased. My hands started shaking. I looked around for Danny, found him standing near the front, watching the slideshow with a soft smile. He didn't notice. He didn't see what I saw, that in this carefully curated version of Thomas's life, I simply didn't exist. Beautiful, isn't it? Patricia appeared beside me, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Rebecca worked so hard on this presentation. She wanted Thomas to have a record of all the important people in his life. The emphasis on important was subtle but unmistakable. I couldn't speak. If I opened my mouth, I'd either cry or scream, and I refused to give her the satisfaction of either. The slideshow ended to applause. Then Rebecca stood up, microphone in hand, preparing to give a speech. "Thank you all so much for being here today," she began, her voice confident and clear. "Thomas is so blessed to be surrounded by such love and support. I especially want to thank my mother, who has been an absolute rock during these first 2 years, helping with late-night feedings, offering wisdom, being the grandmother every child deserves." She went on, thanking her father, her sister, various friends. The list grew longer and longer, and with each name that wasn't mine, each acknowledgement that skipped right over my existence, I felt myself disappearing a little more. Danny should have noticed. My son, who'd once been so attuned to my feelings, should have seen my face, understood what was happening. But he was clapping along with everyone else, nodding in agreement, completely oblivious to the fact that his mother had just been publicly erased from his son's life. When the speech ended, Rebecca called Thomas over to cut his cake. A 3-tiered monstrosity decorated with fondant animals that probably cost more than my car payment. Patricia stood on one side, Rebecca's father on the other, positioning themselves for the photographer like this was a magazine shoot. "Danny, bring your mother over for the photo," I heard someone say. My heart leaped. Finally. But Rebecca's hand shot out, touching Danny's arm. "Actually, Thomas gets overwhelmed with too many people. Let's keep it small. Just us and my parents. We can do extended family photos later." Later never came. I watched them cut that cake, watched the photographer capture the moment, watched my son stand there with his new family while I remained on the outside looking in. And something inside me shifted from hurt to something else. Something harder. Something that had been building for months but had finally crystallized into clarity. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't about Thomas's comfort or routine or any of the excuses Rebecca had been feeding us. This was deliberate, calculated. She'd been systematically removing me from their lives, rewriting the family narrative, and positioning herself and her family at the center while pushing me to the margins. And she'd been succeeding because I'd let her. Because I'd been so afraid of being the difficult mother-in-law that I'd made myself invisible instead. The party continued around me. Gifts were opened. Mine was buried in the pile, barely acknowledged. Games were played. Laughter echoed through that pristine tent. I stayed until the end because leaving early would have made a scene, and I was still too well trained in swallowing my pain to allow myself that release. When I finally said my goodbyes, Danny walked me to my car. "Thanks for coming, Mom. I know this isn't really your scene, but it meant a lot to have you here." I looked at my son. This man I'd raised, this person I'd sacrificed everything for, and I wanted to shake him, wanted to scream. "Did you not see what just happened? Did you not notice that your wife just erased me from your son's entire life story?" But instead I smiled, kissed his cheek, told him I loved him, because sometimes the truth has to reveal itself. Sometimes people have to open their own eyes instead of having them forced open. As I drove away from that estate, watching it disappear in my rearview mirror, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight for my place in their lives anymore. I wasn't going to beg or accommodate or shrink myself to fit into Rebecca's perfect picture. I was going to step back completely. And when I did, when my presence was truly gone instead of just diminished, we'd see if my son finally noticed what he'd been taking for granted all along. What I didn't know was that my absence would reveal more than just Rebecca's calculated cruelty. It was about to expose something else entirely, something that would crack their perfect facade wide open. The weeks after Thomas's birthday party passed in a strange, hollow silence. I stopped calling Danny every Sunday. I stopped sending the little care packages I used to mail, homemade cookies, articles I'd clipped from magazines that I thought he'd enjoy, small toys for Thomas. I stopped reaching out first, stopped making myself available at a moment's notice, stopped bending over backwards to fit into whatever small space they'd leave for me. I simply stepped back. First, nothing changed. Danny didn't call. Rebecca didn't text. It was like they hadn't even noticed I was gone, which hurt in a way I hadn't anticipated. But I held firm. I kept myself busy, picked up extra shifts at the diner, started volunteering at the community center, reconnected with old friends I'd neglected while trying so hard to be the perfect grandmother. And slowly, something unexpected happened. I started feeling lighter. Not happy exactly. The ache of missing my grandson never went away. But without the constant rejection, without the weekly reminders that I wasn't wanted or valued, I could breathe again. I could remember who I was before I'd shrunk myself down to fit into Rebecca's world. 3 weeks passed, then 4, then 6. Finally, on a Tuesday evening while I was fixing myself a simple dinner, my phone rang. Danny's name lit up the screen. "Hey, Mom." His voice sounded off, strained. I haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay?" I stirred my soup slowly, carefully choosing my words. "Everything's fine, baby. Just been busy." "Too busy to call?" That's not like you. The irony wasn't lost on me. All those weeks when he'd been too busy to call, and I'd made excuses for him. But I kept my voice gentle. "I figured you had your hands full with Thomas and Rebecca's family. Didn't want to be a bother." "You're never a bother, Mom. You know that." Did I? Because for the past year, every interaction had made me feel like exactly that. We talked for a few more minutes, surface-level conversation about weather and work, before he said something that made my heart skip. "Thomas asked about you yesterday." I set down my spoon. "He did?" "Yeah. We were looking at some old photos on my phone, and there was one of you holding him at the hospital. He pointed and said, 'Who dat?' When I told him you were his grandma, he got quiet. Then he asked, 'Where Gamma?' Like he was wondering why you haven't been around." The tears came before I could stop them. My grandson, who barely knew me, who'd been kept at arm's length from me for so long, was asking for me. "I miss him, Danny," I whispered. "I miss him so much it hurts. Then come over. This weekend. Just come spend time with him." I wanted to say yes. Every cell in my body wanted to say yes. But I'd learned something in these weeks of silence, that showing up where you're not fully welcomed only teaches people that your presence doesn't matter. "I'd love to, baby. But I need you to understand something. I'm not going to keep fighting for scraps of time with my own grandson. I'm not going to keep feeling like a guest in my own son's life. So before I come over, I need to know that Rebecca is okay with it. Really okay with it. Not just tolerating me because you insisted." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Mom, I don't understand where this is coming from. Rebecca has never." "Danny." My voice was firmer than it had been in months. "At Thomas's birthday party, I wasn't in a single photograph on that slideshow. Not one. Rebecca thanked everyone except me. I stood in that tent for 3 hours, and I might as well have been invisible. So before I open my heart up to more of that, I need to know things are going to be different." Another long silence. Then, quietly, "I didn't notice." "God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't notice." My dear, if this story is touching your heart, do an old woman a favor and subscribe to Grandma Alice Stories. Hit that button. Ring the bell. Because every lesson I share comes from a lifetime of love, loss, and learning. And trust me, this story isn't over yet. Not by a long shot. That weekend, Danny came to visit me instead. alone. He sat at my small kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with homework, where we'd eaten countless meals together, where I'd held his hand after his father died and promised we'd be okay. He looked tired, older somehow. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, "and I started paying attention, really paying attention." I poured him coffee, waited. Last week, Rebecca's mother came over for dinner. She was holding Thomas, telling him stories about when Rebecca was little, and I realized she sees him almost every day. She has a key to our house. She lets herself in whenever she wants, and Rebecca loves it. Calls her so helpful. He stared into his mug. "But when you offered to watch Thomas for one afternoon, Rebecca acted like you were asking to take him on a cross-country road trip. And I just accepted her reasoning. Didn't question it. Didn't think about how that must have felt for you." "Why didn't you question it?" I asked softly. He shook his head. I think I was so focused on keeping Rebecca happy, on proving to her family that I was good enough for her, that I forgot about the person who'd always believed I was good enough. The person who'd sacrificed everything to make sure I had a chance at a better life. His voice cracked on those last words. When Rebecca and I started dating, her mother made comments about my background, about how I was raised. Nothing direct, but I'd catch these looks, these little remarks about different worlds and adjusting to our family's expectations. And instead of defending us, I just worked harder to fit in. Worked harder to prove I belonged in their world. "Oh, Danny," I whispered. "I let her rewrite our story, Mom. I let Rebecca and her family act like my childhood was something to overcome instead of something to be proud of. Like you were some embarrassing chapter one needed to move past instead of the reason I had any chapters at all." The tears were streaming down his face now. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I reached across the table, took his hand. "Baby, I know you love me. I've never doubted that. But love without respect isn't enough. Love without consideration isn't enough. And love that requires me to make myself smaller so someone else can feel bigger? That's not the kind of love I taught you." He nodded, squeezing my hand. "I know, and things are going to change. I promise you, things are going to change." "What about Rebecca?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I tried talking to her. About the birthday party, about how you've been feeling. And Mom, she didn't react the way I expected." "What do you mean?" "She got defensive. Started listing all the times she'd invited you over, all the ways she'd tried to include you. But when I brought up specific examples, like the slideshow, like her mother having unlimited access while you had to ask permission, she said I was being manipulated. That you were playing the victim to come between us." My blood went cold. "She actually said that?" "She said you were jealous of her mother's relationship with Thomas. That you couldn't handle not being the center of attention anymore. That I needed to set boundaries with you before you ruined our marriage." The words hung in the air like poison. This was worse than I'd thought. Rebecca wasn't just thoughtlessly pushing me aside. She was actively working to turn my son against me, to reframe my hurt as manipulation, my legitimate concerns as attacks on their marriage. "What did you say to her?" I asked. Danny looked at me with eyes that had finally opened. "I told her that the only boundary that needed setting was with people who couldn't respect my mother, and that if she couldn't make room for both of you in our lives, then we had a serious problem." "How did she react to that?" "She hasn't spoken to me in 3 days. I should have felt vindicated. My son had finally seen the truth, had finally stood up for me. But as I looked at his exhausted face, at the weight he was carrying, I felt something else entirely. The terrible understanding that this battle was far from over. Rebecca wasn't going to step aside gracefully, and what I didn't know yet was just how far she was willing to go to win.